Welcome back to The Deep Dive, where we take your stack of research, all your articles, notes, and data, and turn it into instant, highly digestible expertise.
And today, we are taking a fascinating trip into a state that is just, well, it's a study in paradox,
I'm talking about Colorado.
the Centennial state. And it really is defined by these magnificent natural contradictions, from its, mathematically precise borders to its towering peaks and arid plains.
So our mission today, with this huge stack of material, is to distill the key dynamics that define this Western Titan.
Right. Its intense climate, its very violent history of resource wars, and then its modern identity as this hub for both high-tech defense and progressive social policy.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have an enormous amount of material here, covering everything from the deep history of the Ute Nation to, well, the complexities of marijuana tax revenue.
A lot to get through.
A ton.
Yeah.
But before we get into the density of the state's interior, let's just look at the map itself. Because Colorado presents some truly fundamental quirks right from its external boundaries.
It really does. It's a geometric oddity on the map of the United States.
It's a perfect box.
Yeah. Colorado, along with Wyoming and Utah, holds the unique distinction of being one of the only states whose boundaries are defined entirely by straight lines of latitude and longitude. It is, mathematically speaking, a perfect rectangle.
So it's a rectangle carved out by surveyors, not by, natural features like rivers or coastlines that define most other states.
Exactly. It stretches from 37 degrees north to 41 degrees north, and it spans 7 degrees of longitude.
And this devotion to geometry, which was imposed back in the 19th century, that led directly to one of the most famous geographic points in the country.
The Four Corners Monument.
That spot where 4 states meet: Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. It's the single location in the U.S. where you can stand in 4 jurisdictions at once.
And, while those boundaries are intended to be perfectly straight lines, getting the exact location for that monument right was, well, it was a massive undertaking.
I can imagine.
Because of the limitations of 19th century surveying, the final marker sits at 36 degrees 590456 rural, 109 degrees 24300 west.
So not quite perfect.
Not quite. It took generations of precise work, something like 697 markers and lines, to finally define that spot officially.
And this mathematical neatness immediately clashes with the internal landscape.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is defined by staggering verticality. I mean, you have the highest point, Mount Elbert, soaring up to 14,440 feet.
And that's the highest summit of the entire Rocky Mountain range in North America.
The highest.
That elevation is just foundational to the state's identity. But the geographic contradiction is most clearly visible when you look at the other extreme, its lowest point.
Right, where the Arickaree River flows out into Kansas. And that elevation is 3,317 feet.
Which still sounds incredibly high.
3,317 feet still sounds like a mountain summit to someone on the East Coast.
And that's the whole point. That lowest elevation point is higher than the highest points of 18 other U.S. states, plus the District of Columbia.
That's an incredible fact.
It is. Colorado is the only state in the Union that sits entirely above 1,000 meters in elevation. This fundamental verticality shapes every single aspect of the state, from its climate and water politics to its demographics and economy.
It's a state literally built on high ground.
Literally.
And before we dive into the regions, let's just anchor ourselves in the name itself: Colorado.
It's a Spanish term, Colorado, which means colored red or ruddy.
And that presumably refers to the river.
It's highly likely, yes. It refers to that intense iron-red color of the silt and mud carried down by the massive Colorado River system as it carved through the canyons, an image that is still highly evocative today.
And of course, the historical moniker, the Centennial state.
Right. It was admitted to the Union on August 1st, 1876, so it became the 38th state just 4 weeks after the centennial of the signing of the Declaration of Independence.
Oh, okay.
And that timing just cemented its official nickname and tied its identity directly to the birth of the nation.
So given that verticality and that scale, let's transition into exploring this unique geography in detail. The sources break Colorado into 5 primary regions. But if you just look at the population centers, the state is immediately defined by this immense urban-rural split.
A huge split. The Front Range urban corridor is where the vast majority of Colorado life is concentrated.
Politically, economically.
Demographically, everything. It's a ribbon of humanity running right along the eastern base of the Rockies.
70% of the state's population lives along that relatively narrow strip.
70%.
Running roughly from Cheyenne, Wyoming, all the way south through Pueblo, Colorado. This includes Denver, of course.
The capital, largest city.
Colorado Springs, the second largest, and then the thriving university and tech hubs of Boulder and Fort Collins.
And their location is just crucial. Sitting immediately east of that towering spine of the Rockies means these centers are partially protected from the heaviest storms rolling in from the Pacific.
So the mountains act as a shield.
A massive shield. However, as we'll see, that also places them in a persistent precipitation shadow, which makes their entire existence dependent on water imported from the other side of those mountains.
Which is a huge theme we'll come back to. Now, if you move eastward from the Front Range, you immediately hit the vastness of the Colorado Eastern Plains.
Right, high plains country.
And what's that like?
Well, this is a semi-arid region sitting at elevations from about 3,350 feet up to 7,500 feet. It's classic prairie land.
So we're talking agriculture.
Huge swaths of agriculture and ranching. Massive operations producing corn, wheat, hay, oats, alongside substantial cattle and hog enterprises. Economically, these are the breadbasket counties.
And I imagine their primary concern is water security.
Absolutely. The plains rely heavily on surface water from the South Platte and Arkansas river systems, which drain east, but increasingly they depend on subterranean sources accessed via artesian wells.
And that's not sustainable.
Well, the alarming trend that the material notes is that heavy usage for large-scale irrigation has caused these underground reserves to just decline rapidly.
That's a major red flag.
A huge red flag, because the sustainability of that high-yield agricultural economy fundamentally relies on water supplies that are demonstrably finite, and they're being depleted faster than they can recharge.
Okay, now we turn to the magnificent spine of the state, the Rocky Mountains.
This is the source of the state's nickname and its greatest resource.
And this is where the sheer scale of the landscape becomes clear.
I mean, Colorado has 53 true peaks and 58 named peaks that exceed 14,000 feet.
The famous 14ers.
The 14ers. In fact, the 30 highest major summits in the entire North American Rocky Mountain chain are all located within Colorado's borders.
Wow. That concentration must create intensely distinct ecological zones.
It does. You can see it really clearly in the altitude of the tree line, the elevation above which trees can't grow. It sits around 12,000 feet in the warmer southern part of the state, but it drops significantly to around 10,500 feet as you move north.
And historically, this spine was also the source of immense wealth.
Right, specifically along the Colorado Mineral Belt. It's a geological formation stretching from the San Juan Mountains north toward Boulder and Central City. And that belt contains virtually all of the state's historic gold and silver mining districts.
And the mountains dictate the entire hydrologic future of the United States through the Continental Divide. Let's just stress the function of this feature.
This is, and I'm not exaggerating, this is arguably Colorado's most globally significant geographic feature. The divide runs along the crest of the Rockies, and it's the great separator.
So everything on one side goes one way.
Every single drop of rain or snowmelt that falls east of the divide drains eventually toward the Gulf of Mexico, primarily through the massive Mississippi and Rio Grande system.
And to the west.
Everything that falls west, the western slope, drains via the Colorado and Green Rivers toward the Gulf of California. The amount of water being exported from this snowpack literally defines the viability of economies thousands of miles away.
Okay, so the Front Range, where 70% of the people live, sits on the wrong side of the divide if their main water source is the western slope.
Exactly.
So how do they actually manage that diversion?
Well, that's the key technical point that links the geography to the policy. They don't just rely on rivers flowing east. The water is moved via trans-mountain diversion projects.
So tunnels.
Immense feats of engineering. Tunnels bored directly through the mountains under the Continental Divide to move water from the western slope drainage basins to the populated eastern slope, the Moffett Tunnel, which funnels water to Denver, and the Frying Pan, Arkansas project.
These are massive projects.
Massive.
Yeah.
They are the infrastructure required to sustain the current population levels. Without moving water from west to east, the Front Range urban corridor simply could not exist in its current form.
Which brings us to the western slope itself and the south-central region. What defines the western slope?
It's vast, it's less populated, and it's highly varied. You've got high deserts, deep canyons, alpine areas. It's home to major national parks like Dinosaur National Monument and Colorado National Monument.
And this is where the skiing is.
Critically, yes. The western slope hosts the major ski resort hubs like Aspen, Vail, Breckenridge, which makes tourism a huge part of its economy. Grand Junction is the largest city over there, located right at the confluence of the Colorado and Gunnison rivers.
And the South Central region, specifically the San Luis Valley.
Geologically, this is one of the most fascinating areas. The San Luis Valley is this immense high desert basin where the headwaters of the Rio Grande originate.
And it has this unique feature, right? A closed basin?
Right. The northern section contains the San Luis Closed Basin, which is an endorheic basin.
Meaning what, exactly?
It means it's an area where water flows in but never flows out to the sea. The runoff collects, sinks, and evaporates.
And that's what creates the dunes.
This unique hydrology, combined with sand accumulation, is what helped create the incredible scale of the Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve. It's a perfect example of how the lack of water flow can be just as defining as the abundance of it.
So given this enormous range of elevation and topography, it's no surprise that Colorado's climate is defined by extreme contrasts and complexity. It's not just a snowy mountain state.
Oh, far from it. The eastern plains fall into the mid-latitude semi-arid category. In the Köppen climate classification, that's BASK,
And not in plain English.
it means low ambient humidity, intense solar radiation, and cool, clear nights. That combination results in a massive diurnal temperature range.
So big swings.
Huge swings. It's common for the temperature swing between the daytime high and the nighttime low to exceed 30 or even 40 degrees Fahrenheit.
And we keep coming back to that precipitation shadow along the Front Range.
Yes, the Front Range urban corridor is on the lee side of those giant mountain ranges, so it's prone to a pronounced precipitation shadow.
And the state average is low to begin with.
The overall state average is only about 17 inches of precipitation annually. Even though 75% of the limited precipitation that does fall on the plains occurs during the growing season, from April to September, the state is just perpetually drought-prone.
So there's always some level of drought somewhere.
Almost always. In fact, large sections of the state are rarely classified as being entirely free from some degree of drought. It indicates a chronic water deficit.
And when it's dry like that, that's when the wind takes over. Tell us about the famous Chinook winds.
Chinook winds are a key characteristic of Front Range weather. They're these warm, dry, downslope winds that occur when stable, moist air is forced up the mountain, drops its moisture as snow or rain.
And then it rushes down the other side.
And it compresses and heats rapidly as it descends the leeward side. This can cause these dramatic warming events in winter.
Right, you hear about it being 70 degrees in Denver in January.
Exactly, sometimes pushing temperatures in Denver or Boulder up to 70 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, melting snow rapidly and just setting the stage for very, very rapid weather changes.
Okay, moving to severe weather. The state faces threats like hail and tornadoes, but the long-term existential hazard is linked directly to the drought conditions.
Right.
Catastrophic wildfire.
Absolutely. The eastern plains lie on the extreme western edge of Tornado Alley, so they do get severe wind events. You know, the Lyman F3 in 1990 or the Windsor EF3 in 2008.
The hail is more common.
Statistically, the most frequent and most economically damaging severe weather hazard is large-scale hail. The sources reference the 2017 storm as a key example.
What happened there?
The 2017 hailstorm that swept across the Denver metro area was the costliest in state history in terms of insured property losses. It just highlighted the vulnerability of these concentrated urban populations.
But nothing compares to wildfire.
Nothing compares to the destructive power of wildfire combined with drought. And the dryness is becoming a chronic condition, amplified by changing climate patterns.
Yeah, the material confirms that. Most of Colorado has warmed 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit over the last century.
Right, which accelerates snowmelt and decreases the flow in the Colorado River system. This climate shift is just fueling fire conditions. We saw this starkly in 2020.
2020 was a brutal year.
It was. Colorado suffered the 3 largest wildfires in its recorded history: Pine Gulch, Cameron Peak, and East Troublesome, and they all happened in the same season.
And then the Marshall Fire in 2021 brought that danger right into the densely populated corridor.
The Marshall Fire was a defining tragedy. It was unique because it wasn't a remote mountain fire. It was a wind-driven urban interface fire. It destroyed over 1,000 homes in suburban neighborhoods along the Front Range near Boulder.
Unbelievable.
It became the most destructive fire ever recorded in the state in terms of property loss. It just highlighted this vulnerability that comes when you push development into historically arid prairie lands that are susceptible to extreme wind.
Let's circle back to the national significance of the water. We touched on it, but it's critical.
The water flowing from the Colorado Rockies it's just critical. It is the primary water source for farms, towns, and cities across a huge swath of the American West.
We're talking New Mexico, Arizona.
New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Nevada. And it feeds rivers that support agriculture in the Midwest, Nebraska, Kansas, and the South Oklahoma, Texas, as well as diversions to California.
So Colorado is essentially the continental water battery.
That's a great way to put it. And as climate change reduces the available water, the state is placed in this impossible position of having to manage a dwindling resource that sustains a massive portion of the U.S. population and economy.
So water management becomes the single most defining crisis for Colorado's future.
It has to be. It impacts everything from agriculture to forestry and tourism, everything.
Before we move on to history, let's quickly address the dynamic relationship between humans and wildlife in this environment,
Yeah.
specifically focusing on conservation and reintroduction efforts.
Well, the fate of the gray wolf is a major contemporary story in Colorado. The species was entirely extirpated.
Completely gone.
Completely gone. The last wild wolf was shot in 1945. For decades, they were just not there.
Yet the sources note a natural recolonization began around 2019.
That's right. A few wandered back in. But the official return came via a highly controversial vote in 2020.
So the voters decided this.
Yes, making Colorado the first state to mandate the reintroduction of a species via public referendum. The measure committed the state to having a stable population by the end of 2022.
And the controversy is intense.
Very intense because ranching operations, especially on the western slope, fear livestock losses.
So if the voters approved it, why the strong resistance and what are officials doing about it?
The resistance comes from the financial reality of livestock attacks. So to mitigate this, wildlife officials have had to legalize and promote specific non-lethal deterrents.
Things like what?
Things like sound devices, flattery, which is that colored flagging tape, and range riders to discourage wolves from preying on cattle and sheep.
And is it working?
The effectiveness is still being debated, and the state now has to implement this complex compensation program for ranchers who do suffer losses. It's a real balancing act between ecological restoration and economic demands.
And then you have the inverse problem. Species that are not native, thriving, sometimes a little too well.
Right. Mountain goats and moose are two key examples. Moose are non-native to Colorado, but have established huge, thriving populations in the high mountains.
And mountain goats.
The mountain goats were introduced between 1947 and 1972. Now, some fossil evidence led the state to declare them technically native back in 1993, but the current population stems from those introductions.
And that density has created problems.
It has. This dense population has faced ecological challenges. For example, a mysterious illness tragically wiped out nearly all the mountain goat kids in 2013, 2014, and again in 2019.
Wow.
It indicates that their high numbers may lead to greater vulnerability to disease.
And finally, the successful conservation of the pronghorn now creates a conflict along the urbanization front.
The pronghorn population is a great conservation success story. They dropped to a low of only 15,000 animals in the 1960s.
And now?
Conservation efforts led to a massive rebound, reaching 85,000 by 2019. So now the issue is that these herds encounter the relentless spread of suburban housing along the Eastern Front Range.
So what's the solution?
Wildlife officials are now actively suggesting, and sometimes mandating, that landowners modify their traditional fencing, adding specialized gates or bottom clearance, to allow these numerous pronghorns to safely and continuously migrate across these increasingly fragmented landscapes.
It's a perfect illustration of how successful conservation then has to adapt to human expansion.
Exactly.
Moving into Section 2, we turn to history, and it is a story forged by conflict.
Conflict over territory, conflict over land, and ultimately violent labor conflict.
The history is incredibly deep, though. It's rooted in indigenous occupations spanning at least 13,500 years.
Right. You have the ancient Pueblo peoples who inhabited the southwest Colorado Plateau for centuries, and the Ute Nation had a long history across the southern and western Rockies.
And then others arrived later.
Later, the Arapaho and Cheyenne migrated west from the Great Lakes region onto the High Plains, bringing with them a different set of cultural practices and land use patterns.
So the clash of colonial claims was just inevitable.
It was a geopolitical mess. Spain claimed the entire region as part of Nuevo Mexico. Then the U.S. acquired the eastern slice via the Louisiana Purchase from France in 1803.
Setting up a clash of claims.
A big one. Zebulon Pike's reconnaissance expedition in 1806 was stopped when he was arrested by Spanish forces in the San Luis Valley and expelled. The U.S. eventually solidified its claim via a treaty in 1819.
But the real shift happened after the Mexican-American War.
That's when Mexico ceded over half of what would become Colorado in 1848 via the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo.
And that act fundamentally redefined the region.
It did. And crucially, the sources emphasize that the first permanent Euro-American settlement, San Luis, established in 1851, was settled by Hispano residents.
They came from New Mexico.
Right, moving north from the Taos area of the New Mexico territory.
Why is the distinction between Hispanos and the broader Mexican-American population so important here?
Because it speaks to the cultural bedrock of the state. The Hispanos represent this pre-annexation, continuous population with deep territorial roots that long precede the gold rush.
So they brought their culture with them.
They brought established New Mexican culinary, musical, and architectural traditions, cementing a permanent Spanish-speaking Catholic culture in southern and southwestern Colorado that's distinct from the later waves of Mexican-American migration. It's a legacy that defines the region today.
But the relative stability of that period was shattered by the Pikes Peak Gold Rush, beginning in 1858.
The promise of gold, even small amounts of it, spurred a massive and chaotic influx of settlers. It created a crisis of governance.
So that's what led to the territory being formed.
This rapid population explosion necessitated a formal legal structure, leading to the creation of the Territory of Colorado on February 28, 1861. And the timing was historically critical.
It was right before the Civil War.
Just before the start of the Civil War, the territory was immediately designated as free, which augmented the political and military strength of the Union.
Let's delve into Colorado's role in the Civil War.
Huh.
While there were likely Confederate sympathizers among the new settlers, the territory proved fiercely loyal to the Union.
That loyalty was instrumental in securing the entire Southwest. In 1862, Texas cavalry invaded the New Mexico territory.
What was their goal?
They were aiming to seize the western gold fields and possibly reach Pacific ports. But Colorado volunteers, known for their toughness, force-marched south and intercepted the Texans at the Battle of Glorieta Pass.
And they won.
They destroyed their supply train and forced a retreat. That victory ensured the Confederacy made no further attempts to seize the vital Southwest territories.
Yet, almost immediately after this victory, the state's attention turned inward toward a campaign of horrific violence against indigenous populations. This brings us to the Sand Creek Massacre in 1864.
This remains one of the darkest chapters in U.S. military history. The territorial governor, John Evans, appointed Colonel John Chivington to lead the Colorado Volunteers. And Chivington and his men attacked a band of Cheyenne and Arapaho who had camped along Sand Creek.
And they were there under protection?
Under the explicit, guaranteed protection of the U.S. federal government, they had come to negotiate peace.
Chivington reported this as a great triumph against hostile forces.
But the truth was immediately condemned. Internal U.S. Army inquiries concluded it was a blatant massacre of Indians at peace. They noted that most of the 150 to 200 people killed were women, children, and the elderly.
And there were atrocities.
Eyewitness accounts detailed that bodies were hideously mutilated and desecrated. And although Governor Evans was asked to resign in disgrace, and 3 separate inquiries condemned Chivington's actions,
No one was punished.
no military or political perpetrator was ever punished for the atrocity. And that lack of accountability just amplified the tragedy.
So in the post-war environment, mining revived, which laid the groundwork for statehood.
Right. Silver became the next great boom. Discoveries near Argentine Pass in 1864 led to the massive Colorado silver boom centered around Leadville starting in 1878.
And this resource wealth stabilized the territory.
It did, but it also set up a classic boom-bust cycle, didn't it?
A catastrophic one.
The boom peaked, only to be
And it was this resource stabilization, despite all the violence and the boom-bust cycles, that allowed Colorado to be formally admitted to the Union.
on August 1st, 1876.
The 20th century in Colorado.
Yeah.
It really exchanged military conflicts with indigenous populations for these brutal conflicts between industrial barons and labor organizers.
The era of the labor wars.
Yes, and the working conditions, particularly in the deep mines and coal fields, were notoriously dangerous.
Which led to organized and violent opposition. We saw the 1903-1904 Western Federation of Miners strike and the incredibly brutal Colorado Coalfield War of 1913-1914.
And the name most associated with that conflict is the Ludlow Massacre.
The Ludlow Massacre is a defining moment in American labor history. Striking coal miners and their families were living in a tent colony near Ludlow, and on April 20th, 1914, the Colorado National Guard and hired mine guards attacked the colony with machine guns.
And the worst of it came after the fighting.
The horrifying aftermath included the death of 2 women and 11 children who suffocated when they sought shelter in a pit beneath a tent that was then set on fire.
Unbelievable.
Federal troops ultimately had to intervene to end the wider Coalfield War.
And the violence didn't end there.
No. Even the 1927-1928 coal strike, which was ultimately successful in securing a modest pay increase, culminated in the Columbine Mine Massacre.
Where 6 strikers were killed.
Following a confrontation with state-hired Colorado Rangers, it's sobering to realize that over 5,000 Colorado miners, many of them Eastern European immigrants, died in accidents between the 1880s and 1930s.
Which just underscores the lethal nature of the state's foundational industries.
It does.
This era of intense instability, industrial trauma, and social upheaval, it created a fertile ground for political extremism. And our sources pivot directly from the labor struggles to another dark period, the political dominance of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s.
This is a crucial element of Colorado's history that often gets minimized. In the mid-1920s, the Second Klan's Colorado realm achieved unprecedented political power.
They infiltrated everything.
They successfully infiltrated and effectively controlled the upper echelons of both the Democratic and Republican parties statewide.
When you say controlled, what does that mean in practical terms?
It was systemic dominance. The Klan's influence secured the election of the governor, the state attorney general, and controlled numerous local police departments, particularly in Denver.
And they used that power to push an agenda.
An anti-Catholic and anti-immigrant agenda. Their targets were primarily African Americans, but also Catholics and Eastern European immigrants groups seen as undermining the Klan's vision of white Protestant America.
So there were public displays of this power.
Cross burnings and parades were regular public displays of intimidation in cities like Pueblo and Florence.
And it took tremendous effort to dismantle that structure.
It required dedicated efforts by non-Klan lawmen and politicians to expose the corruption and dismantle the network, which fortunately began to rapidly wane by the end of the decade as political sentiment shifted.
Following this turbulent first half of the century, Colorado became a center for critical mid-century social change movements.
The state proved foundational to modern civil rights efforts. The Chicano movement, which was a vital social movement emphasizing Chicano identity and cultural pride.
It really started in Denver.
It's widely considered to have gained national organizational footing in Denver. The city hosted the foundational National Chicano Youth Liberation Conference in March 1969, an event that helped set the movement's political agenda for the following decades.
And Colorado was also a pioneer in abortion rights.
Yes, becoming the first state to loosen restrictions when the governor signed a law allowing abortions in cases of rape, incest, or threats to the woman's health in 1967.
We must also acknowledge the state's tragic history as the site of multiple high-profile mass shootings that began in the late 1990s.
This is a devastating, recurring feature of the state's recent history, and it has profoundly impacted the national discourse on gun violence.
It started with Columbine.
It started with the infamous Columbine High School massacre in 1999. Later, the 2012 Aurora movie theater shooting, which killed 12 people, led directly to legislative action, including the state instituting magazine capacity limits.
And the tragedies continued.
The 2021 King Soopers shooting in Boulder and the anti-LGBT violence in Colorado Springs in 2022.
Finally, let's give proper weight to the state's military and space heritage, which defines so much of its modern economy.
The federal defense footprint is immense and technologically advanced. 4 U.S. Navy warships have carried the name USS Colorado.
And more critically, the state hosts crucial installations.
The U.S. Air Force Academy, founded in 1954, the massive Fort Carson Army Post, and key components of the U.S. Space Force, including Buckley, Peterson, and Schriever bases.
And the iconic Cheyenne Mountain Complex. What is its contemporary significance?
Cheyenne Mountain is this massive legacy from the Cold War. It houses the NORAD Command Center, and while much of the routine monitoring has been moved elsewhere, the facility remains a critical, hardened command post for monitoring missile warnings and space surveillance.
So its existence and the presence of these massive installations,
including the commissioning of the first Space Force officers at the Air Force Academy in 2020.
It makes Colorado a central pillar of U.S. global defense and technological innovation.
Absolutely.
Shifting now to Section 3, governance, demographics, and social shifts. Colorado has undergone a significant political identity shift.
A major one.
Moving from a reliably Republican state to a reliably blue one in the 21st century.
That transformation is stark. Post-World War II, Colorado was generally considered a red state, but demographic shifts and urbanization have just fundamentally changed its character.
So it's voted Democrat at every presidential election since 2008.
Right. And it's now considered a relatively safe Democratic state, often serving as a model for how the urban West has politically separated from the rural West.
And this creates a deeply polarized political geography that mirrors the physical one.
Exactly. The Front Range urban corridor, especially the dense Denver metro area and university towns like Boulder and Fort Collins, forms the liberal stronghold.
While the conservative power remains in other areas.
Right, centered in key areas. The Eastern Plains, the military-heavy, evangelical conservative base of Colorado Springs, and portions of the Western Slope, like Grand Junction.
And the result is a solid Democratic majority in the General Assembly.
As of 2023, yes. They currently hold a supermajority in the Senate and a strong majority in the House.
What's fascinating is that so much of Colorado's political history, both progressive and reactionary, has been driven by direct voter action through the referendum process.
This mechanism, allowing citizens to bypass the legislature, is central to the state's political DNA.
And it started early.
Very early. Colorado became the first state to grant women the right to vote via popular vote in 1893. They also acted decisively to end prohibition, approving its repeal in 1932, a full year before the 21st Amendment was nationally ratified.
And sometimes that conviction translates into rejecting major projects like the Olympics.
That rejection tells us something profound about the Colorado voters' attitude. In 1970, Denver was chosen to host the 1976 Winter Olympics.
And then the voters said no.
2 years later, voters rejected the referendum to fund the event. They were worried about the cost, the environmental impact, and the new taxes. It remains the only time a host city has ever turned down the games after being selected.
That's a testament to a strong streak of fiscal conservatism.
And self-reliance, even when faced with international prestige.
The history of LGBTQ+ rights in Colorado is perhaps the most legally complex example of that voter initiative process.
It begins with Amendment 2 in 1992. Voters approved this measure, which barred any city or county from granting protected status to homosexuals or bisexuals.
It was a ban on protection.
It effectively made it illegal for municipalities to pass non-discrimination ordinances protecting LGBTQ+ citizens, a profoundly discriminatory move.
And this led to a landmark U.S. Supreme Court case.
Romer v. Evans in 1996. The Supreme Court ruled that Amendment 2 did not satisfy the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The ruling was significant because it stated that a state cannot amend its constitution just to make it harder for a specific group to seek protection under the law.
So it nullified the amendment.
Right, and secured essential rights.
And we saw something similar with the ban on same-sex marriage via Amendment 43 in 2006.
Which was eventually nullified by the federal Obergefell v. Hodges ruling in 2015. And just recently, in 2024, Colorado voters took the final step and explicitly voted to repeal that now defunct marriage ban from their state constitution entirely.
Erasing that legal legacy.
Completely.
And Colorado voters continue to be highly active in defining social policy.
They do. In 2024, residents voted to establish an explicit constitutional right to abortion within the state. And we also saw Colorado thrust onto the national stage when the state Supreme Court ruled in 2023 that Donald Trump was disqualified from the 2024 presidential ballot.
Which was later overruled by the U.S. Supreme Court.
Right. But it reinforced Colorado's role as this battleground for cutting-edge legal and social debates.
Let's look now at the demographics that underpin these political and social shifts. Colorado's population profile is highly defined by continuous migration.
It's long been a destination state. The 2000 census found that nearly 60% of Coloradans were born in other states,
which indicates a highly transient and rapidly changing population.
And this constant influx has driven growth. The population first exceeded 1 million in 1930 and is estimated to be almost 6 million today.
And this contributes to the state's political leaning.
Significantly. It contributes to its relatively liberal political leaning and its focus on innovation.
What does the contemporary racial and ethnic makeup look like?
The 2020 census figures show the state is 65.1% non-Hispanic white. However, the Hispanic or Latino population is substantial at 21.9%.
And as we discussed, it's vital to recognize the historical roots of this population.
Absolutely. There's a large Mexican-American population, particularly in metropolitan areas, but there's also the large Hispano population in the southern and southwestern regions, the descendants of the original Spanish settlers who arrived before the Mexican cession.
The sources also point to a very low fertility rate compared to the national average.
Yes. In 2017, Colorado recorded the second lowest fertility rate in the U.S. at 1.63 children per woman.
And that's linked to public health policy.
Directly linked. The state implemented the Title X family planning program, which was significantly bolstered by a grant from Warren Buffett's family. It provided long-acting reversible contraceptives, like IUDs, at low or no cost.
And that had a huge impact.
It's been credited with dramatically reducing teen pregnancies and abortions across the state.
Now, Colorado has a reputation as a very healthy, outdoorsy state. Is that stereotype backed up by the data?
Generally, yes. Colorado is frequently ranked among the healthiest states. It boasts the lowest rates of obesity in the U.S.
And a long life expectancy?
Back in 2014, Colorado residents had the longest life expectancy of any U.S. state at 80.21 years. This is usually attributed to affluence, access to outdoor recreation, and a highly educated population.
But the material clearly warns that these aggregate statistics conceal significant stratification.
Absolutely. The health metrics are deeply linked to wealth and location. The wealthier counties, like Douglas County or Pitkin County, show significantly better health outcomes than the less wealthy, predominantly rural southern counties like Huerfano and Las Animas.
So the overall high ranking obscures stark disparities.
Stark disparities in access to care, poverty, and resource distribution between the urban core and the agricultural periphery.
Let's explore the structure of governance, which has these unique features designed to handle the state's defining resource, water.
Right. The standard 3 branches of government are there. You've got the governor, Jared Polis, and the 7-member Colorado Supreme Court. But unique to Colorado's judiciary is the existence of specialized water courts.
Why does a state need 7 separate specialized water courts?
Because water is the most valuable and hotly contested resource. These courts sit in 7 judicial divisions and are tasked specifically with ruling on water rights, use, and administration.
And they follow a specific legal doctrine.
They adhere to the complex legal doctrine of prior appropriation, often called first in time, first in right. Given the chronic drought and the national dependency on its rivers, these courts are critical for legally managing a finite, indispensable resource.
Beyond the courts, the sources highlight a unique phenomenon that creates a lot of complexity, the sheer number of special districts.
This is where governance gets mind-bogglingly complicated. Colorado has over 4,000 special districts.
1,000.
These are small, localized units of government, separate from counties and municipalities, created to provide one or a few very specific services, like a metro district for water and sewage, or a local recreation district, a fire district.
Each with its own taxing authority.
Often, yes.
Why does Colorado have 4,000 tiny taxing bodies? What's the implication for governance?
Well, the phenomenon is closely tied to the state's constitutional structure, particularly the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, or TABOR.
Which was passed by referendum in 1992.
Right, and TABOR severely restricts the state and local government's ability to raise taxes or spend money without voter approval. So, to circumvent the high barriers of TABOR for large projects, communities have found it easier to create small, localized special districts that can levy a highly targeted tax for a specific purpose.
And the practical effect for a resident or a business is a chaotic tax landscape.
Absolutely chaotic.
Yeah.
The sources stress that the resulting complex tax landscape means that different corners of the same street intersection can have substantially different sales tax rates depending on which special districts happen to overlap at that precise point.
It's hyper-localized, fragmented governance.
You got it.
Let's discuss one of the most famous and successful special districts, the SCFD.
The Scientific and Cultural Facilities District. The SCFD is a truly unique model for cultural funding. It's a dedicated 0.1% retail sales tax, just 1 penny on every $10 collected across 7 Front Range counties.
And it's mandated to support cultural facilities.
Explicitly mandated to support cultural facilities for public enlightenment and entertainment.
And how is that massive pool of money distributed?
It's highly structured into 3 tiers. Tier I gets 65.5% of the revenue, and it funds the largest regional organizations like the Denver Art Museum, the Denver Zoo, and the Denver Botanic Gardens.
And the other tiers?
Tier 3, which receives 13.5%, funds over 280 smaller local community groups, small theaters, orchestras via a grant process. It's a mechanism that stabilizes the entire region's cultural life.
And we also see special districts created purely for infrastructure.
For sure. There are Regional Transportation District, or RTD, and even districts to finance sports venues like Empower Field at Mile High for the Broncos and Coors Field for the Rockies.
Moving it to our final section, let's look at Colorado's modern economic engine and its defining culture. The economy has moved far beyond the boom and bust mining cycles.
Oh, yeah. The state has successfully diversified, with a GDP of $553.3 billion in 2024. The transition from extraction and irrigated agriculture has focused heavily on service, scientific research, and high-technology industries.
But there are still some massive legacy brands rooted here.
A fascinating mix. You have the origins of Quest Telecommunications in Denver in 1879, Samsonite Luggage, also in Denver in 1910, and Jolly Rancher Candy from Golden in 1949.
And some big beverage giants.
Global beverage giants like Coors Beer from Golden in 1873 and Celestial Seasonings Herbal Teas from Boulder in 1969. This combination really speaks to a long history of industrial enterprise mixed with a mid-century counterculture that evolved into today's natural foods sector.
But the most defining element of the modern economy remains the federal government's presence.
It cannot be overstated. The federal government owns 37% of Colorado's total land area, about 24.6 million acres, mostly managed by the U.S. Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management.
And beyond the military installations we discussed.
The state hosts a high concentration of federal research and technical centers, NOAA, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or NREL, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, in Boulder. These institutions create a dense, highly educated workforce pool that feeds directly into the state's private high-tech sector.
Regarding natural resources, what's the current situation with extraction?
Well, while gold and silver are historical, the hydrocarbon resources are immense. Colorado hosts 7 of the largest natural gas fields and 2 of the largest oil fields in the U.S.
And then there's the oil shale.
Crucially, the Pisons Basin contains staggering oil shale deposits. Estimates suggest up to 1 trillion barrels.
A trillion.
To put that into perspective, that is roughly equivalent to the entire world's currently proven conventional oil reserves, though its extraction remains technologically challenging and environmentally controversial.
And what about the other historical minerals, like uranium?
Colorado also holds the 3rd largest uranium reserves in the U.S. The history there is complex. From 1910 to 1922, the focus was on radium mining, creating these specialized yellowcake towns like Uravan.
Are there still operations today?
No major operations were active as of 2016, but the potential remains vast. And complementing this, the state has massive potential for renewable energy wind, solar, hydroelectric, which is a major focus of research at NREL.
And all that natural beauty feeds a massive tourism engine.
Tourism is colossal. It drives the economies of the Western Slope and the mountain resort towns. In 2018, Colorado welcomed 85.2 million visitors, generating $22.3 billion.
But this is the sector most immediately sensitive to climate change impacts.
For sure. Shorter ski seasons, higher wildfire risk, and reduced river flows all pose an expected negative impact on this critical economic component.
Let's shift to the culture. Specifically, the sophisticated culinary and beverage scene that has developed in Colorado.
Yeah, the state seems to have elevated its food profile significantly.
It has moved far beyond being known just for trout and ranching.
It's now recognized for sophisticated Southwest and Rocky Mountain cuisine blended with global influence. Bon Appetit even named Boulder America's Foodiest Town 2010.
And that surprising nugget. Boulder boasts more master sommeliers per capita than either San Francisco or New York City.
That is a staggering statistic. It signals a high degree of affluence and sophisticated demand in the dining scene. And this demand is also supported by events like the annual Food and Wine Classic in Aspen, which has secured that town's reputation as the culinary and luxury capital of the Rocky Mountain region.
And the high-altitude geography is being utilized for the wine industry.
Colorado is home to the highest elevation vineyards in the United States, with most viticulture practiced between 4,000 and 7,000 feet above sea level.
And that climate is good for certain grapes.
The warm summer days and unusually cool nights are ideal for certain varietals. The state has 2 designated American viticultural areas, the Grand Valley AVA and the West Elks AVA. And in 2018, wine enthusiasts named the Grand Valley AVA one of the top 10 wine travel destinations in the world.
But the beverage culture is truly dominated by beer.
Oh, yeah.
It's the Napa Valley of beer.
Absolutely. Colorado has the largest annual production of beer of any state. The northern region, Denver, Boulder, Fort Collins, has an extremely high density of craft breweries,
Including some big names.
globally recognized names like New Belgium and Odell. This craft beer density creates a huge industry for both local consumption and tourism.
Finally, we must discuss what is arguably Colorado's most significant contribution to modern national policy: its pioneering role in cannabis legislation.
Colorado stands as the great pioneer, the first state to legalize marijuana for three distinct uses: medicinal, industrial hemp, and recreational.
And this created the regulatory roadmap that many other states then followed.
It did.
Break down that timeline of legalization.
Okay, medicinal use came first. In 2000, voters passed Amendment 20, legalizing medical marijuana for specific conditions like cancer, glaucoma, HIV/AIDS.
With possession limits.
Right, limiting possession to 2 ounces of usable marijuana and 12 plants. Industrial use, or hemp, followed.
And then recreational use swiftly followed in 2012.
Yes. On November 6, 2012, voters passed Amendment 64, which protected the personal use of marijuana for adults over 21 and established a regulated framework similar to alcohol.
And this was a massive national shift.
A huge shift. It made Colorado the first U.S. state to open recreational marijuana shops on January 1st, 2014.
What has the economic and funding impact been of being the first mover?
Substantial. Sales reached $1.31 billion in 2016, generating $194 million in tax fee and license revenue that year alone. And crucially, the state explicitly allocates that tax revenue.
Where does the money go?
A portion funds the Medical Marijuana Program Cash Fund, with money being used for vital programs like research into pediatric applications for controlling autism symptoms. And significantly, a large amount of the tax revenue is dedicated to public school construction and improvement projects statewide.
So, if we step back and look at the whole picture, from those mathematically straight borders to this highly progressive regulatory environment, what does this deep dive tell us about the core identity of Colorado?
It tells us that Colorado is defined by constant tension. It's a place of geographical extremes, the highest low point, massive mountains towering over arid plains, and intense historical conflict.
Its past is rooted in the horrific violence of the Sand Creek Massacre, the political terror of the Ku Klux Klan.
And deadly labor wars against industrial giants.
Yet its modern identity is defined by a highly educated mobile population that supports high-tech federal installations and consistently pushes the envelope in progressive governance.
Whether that's voting rights, cannabis legalization, or abortion rights.
The state thrives on the dynamic tension between its rugged, resource-rich past and its liberal, forward-looking future.
But the entire system relies on a resource that is not guaranteed: the Rocky Mountain snowpack.
Which brings us back to the crisis that will define the state's coming decades. So here is the provocative thought we should leave you with. Colorado is the headwaters for a water-starved western U.S., obligated by decades of compacts to share this dwindling resource.
And as climate change accelerates and reduces that available snowpack, and as the Front Range population continues to boom, what ethical and economic decisions will Colorado be forced to make regarding its massive water exports?
And what will that mean for its internal industries? Agriculture, forestry, and especially the multi-billion-dollar tourism economy that face the direct existential threat of severe and prolonged water scarcity.
The management of that blue gold will determine whether the Centennial state remains a land of opportunity or a victim of its own geography.
A profound challenge to consider. Thank you for diving deep with us today.